implement API management. See, we have learned API apps. Now there is something called as API management, which is different from API apps. So we are going to cover today first what is API management, how does it encapsulate API apps if any, what are the advantages of it, and of course most important, what is the difference between API app and API management. So API management helps organizations publish API to external partner and internal developers to unlock the potential of their data and services. See, basically we are talking about now certain API. Now that API can be again developed either in Java, PHP or .NET or Python, any language. We are now going to provide an interface where the external users can make use of that API, and also our partners can make use of it, and also the developers within the organization can make use of it. And not just the API, because of the management ability of the service which we are going to talk about, we are going to get some extra benefits on it. So what is that? API management provides the core competencies to ensure successful API program through developer engagement, business insight, analytics, security and protection. All these are the extra advantages we are going to get now over and above the base API which we have. To use the API management, administrators create APIs. Each API consists of one or more operations. Methods here are referred as operations. Each API can be added to one or more products. We are going to create products out of APIs. To use an API, developer will have to subscribe to the product. There is something called as product created. Product is a combination of API, and developer who wants to make use of that API is supposed to subscribe to the product. And once he subscribes to the product, he can make use of the API, implies he can call the operations which are part of that API, and those operations are also restricted through usage policies. So we have got products as one term, subscribe is one more term, policies is one more term, and of course operations and the API. All these are important terms which we are going to work with now. So what is API and operation? APIs are the foundation of API management service. Actually, yes. API is nothing but the set of functionality available for performing a particular task. It can be any functionality. It can be CRUD operations, or it can be operations related to only fetching data and exposing it to others, or it can be something to do with the management of a particular entity, and so on. Each API represents a set of operations available to developers. Each API contains a reference to backend service that implements the API. Basically, it can be API app or web API or stuff like that. And its operation mapped to the operations implemented by the backend service. I repeat, the backend service is something like a web API or an API app, or maybe a Java class which works as an API, and so on. Operations in API management are highly configurable with control over URL mapping, query string, and the path parameters. We can have complete control. What data we want to send from the client application to the backend can be controlled by the API. Request response content, operation response caching, rate limit quotas, IP restriction policies, all these can be implemented. See, it is like this. So we have got at the bottom an API which we develop. Some developer API is there. So on top of this API, we are going to have now the management API. The management API will have methods, operations, and those operations are mapped to the operations in this API. But in addition to just mapping, these are the extra benefits we are going to take out of it. IP restriction, quota, how many times can somebody make a call to the method, how many times in a minute they can call, how many times in a week they can call. They should have an access key to call. Security can be restricted. We can do some kind of caching here so that every time we don't have to get the data from here, and so on and on. So that is the basic beauty of this management API. It acts as an additional layer on top of the actual API which the developer has created. And here, of course, we will have the client application. The client application will use management API. Management API internally will use the actual API, which is providing the functionality. So this is just a catalyst. This is just like a proxy. It is taking the request, identifying the legitimate request or not. If it is legitimate, if it is allowed, maybe add some extra parameters on its own and pass that data here. And all that will be used over here. So input output restrictions can be put by API management. That is the whole idea here. So we have products. Products are how APIs are provided to developers. So this is one API. So like that there can be multiple APIs. All these APIs will be merged into one common product. And products are one which the developers are going to subscribe. Subscribe can be paid subscription, can be free subscription, can be restricted subscription, can be unrestricted subscription, and so on. So products in API management have one or more APIs and are configured with the title, description, and terms of usage. Product can be open or protected. You have the choice. It can be either open or it can be protected. Protected products may be subscribed to before they can be used, while open products can be used even without a subscription. So on top of product, one would require subscription, and then only they can make use of the APIs which are part of the product. Subscription approval is configured at product level and can either require administrator approval or can be auto approval. See, we can have again approval process as automated, where as soon as a subscriber request, immediately the approval, as soon as a developer request, immediately an approval will happen. Alternatively, we can have a list of approvers who would be notified whenever there is a request, and they have to explicitly approve it. Unless they approve, the product will not be accessible to the developer, and they cannot be invoking the API which is part of the product. Yes, groups are created. Groups are nothing but groups of users are managed to the visibility of intro. So suppose let us say I have 100 developers. I cannot create 100 different accounts and keep giving permission. I'll simply give permission to the developers, and I'll put 100 users in the developers group. So there are three groups: administrator group, developers group, guest groups. And of course, in addition to this, we can create our own custom groups also as needed. Custom groups can be managed. So what is administrator group? Azure subscription administrators are members of this group. Administrators manage API management service instance, create the API, operations, and products that are used by developers. So if you are an Azure subscription administrator, infrastructure of Azure if you are managing, you are also a group, you are also an administrator who is responsible for managing the API. Developers, authenticated developers are the one who log on to a developer portal. There is something like a portal created now. So if somebody is a developer, they will hook on to the development portal. They will see the list of all products available. They'll subscribe to the product, or sometimes administrator can give them direct access even without they subscribing it. And from that product they can choose the API. From the API they'll get the list of operations. For a given operation they are going to get the list of all methods input and output parameters, I can say. How should they invoke it? Complete sample will be available, and then they make use of it. Guests are all those unauthenticated developers, prospective customers visiting the developer portal. Those are guests. So sometimes you may give access to guest, limited access. You may probably give read-only access. You will not allow insert, update, delete, but you will give only read access. So something like that. So in addition to these system groups, administrator can create custom groups or leverage external groups which are associated in Active Directory. In AD also you can create certain groups and add them to the system here. So yes, we have understood what is a API and its operations. What is a product? A group of users. Majorly, three are there by default: administrator, developers, and guests. Policies. Now, policies are the actually way of controlling the behavior or powerful capability of API management that allows publisher to change the behavior of the API through configuration. Policies are correction of statements that are executed sequentially on request or response of an API. Popular statements include conversion from XML to JSON and call rate limit to restrict the amount of incoming calls from the developer, and many more policies are available. We'll see with more proper examples. So we have to see what are the components now. When we create a API, let's do that now. API management service. Let's say my may not be there. DSS deep demo management dot Azure API .net. That's the name. We create a new resource group, specify the name of the organization and the administrator email ID, and we have to choose the pricing tier. This is good enough for testing purpose. I think developer is very cheap or almost free. Almost free. 49 USDs per month. And 1 million API calls will be allowed. So let's choose this for the time being for demo purpose, because there is no scaling. All these are fine. These are not, I mean, if it is production, then we'll need all this. But for development, this is good enough. Create. So it's an expensive affair actually. Having an API management service on top of the core API is not a very cheap, or it's not a free affair. It's a little expensive, but at the same time you get a lot of advantages here. So once we have the API created, there are different components of it is being activated. You'll have here publisher portal, developer portal. All these things will be different portals which we are going to get for managing the API. So API gateway is the endpoint that accepts API call and routes them to the backend. Here we'll have an option. API. It is still in preview. What we earlier did with publisher portal, now they are integrating with the portal, main portal itself. These features were all earlier part of publisher portal. They're getting listed here gradually. They're building it. Maybe in a week's time or 2 weeks time, you should see that the preview is gone. But more or less, it will be same. So we'll have to either go to publisher portal or we can simply add it here. So there is an API gateway. That's what I said. This is like a gateway. This is like a gateway. Every request is being routed through this. So that's why it is like a gateway. Accept API call and routes them to the backend. Verifies API key, JWT tokens, certificates and other credentials. That means security implementation is done here itself. You don't have to take care of the security here. Enforce usage quotas and rate limits. Transform your API on the fly without code modifications in case any kind of transformation is needed. Suppose some parameter is being passed and that parameter should be, let us say, appended with some extra data. That extra data can be added here itself, or rather extra parameter itself can be added here. Transforms your API on the fly without code modifications. Caching backend response where set up. Log calls metadata for analytic purpose. Basically how many users have used it, how many calls have received, and so on. Then there is a publisher portal. Define and import the API schema. Package the API into product. Set policies like quota and transformation on the API. Get insights from the analytics and manage users. And then there is a development portal where developers will log in. For complete documentation of the API is available. We can even try the API then and there. Test. Create an account and subscribe to get the API keys. Access analytics on their own usage also. How much usage they have done. They can get to know that information also. So something important, what is the advantage of API apps versus API management? API management is about managing API. You put an API management front end on an API to monitor and throttle usage, manipulate input and output, consolidate several APIs into one endpoint and so forth. Understood? We are going to club multiple APIs, and on top of these APIs we are going to provide an additional layer which is giving us these benefits. That is the job of actually API management. In simple words, it is managing APIs. Whereas API app is all about the API itself, actually hosting the API. The service includes features that facilitate developing and consuming API, but it does not provide any kind of monitoring, throttling, manipulating, consolidating. All these benefits are not there. So we have already seen API apps in the last session. API apps just gives you ability to invoke the API, which is, let us say, something like a web API. So web API, when published as API app, only gets the benefit of Azure, that is scaling benefits, the pricing benefits, security benefits, but management benefits like these things are not available to the API apps. If you don't need management features, you can host API in API apps without using API management, and it's a cheaper economical affair than actually using API management feature. So you have API management that can use the APIs hosted in on-premise, and they can also use the API apps which are hosted in Azure. Both the places we can use it. So some features of API management and API apps have similar functions. Both can automate CORS. CORS is common. CORS is what we have seen. Remember last class, from one website if you are calling methods of another website. That support is there in both. When you request two services together, you would use API management. Basically, multiple APIs are getting used here. So create an API management instance. Yeah, we already created actually. And it takes around 10 minutes to get you the online status. Still getting ready. We don't have choice but to wait now. The developer tier is for development, testing and pilot API programs where high availability is not a concern. That's what we used actually, developer tier. In standard and premium tier, you scale your reserved units to handle more traffic. The standard and premium tier provide you API management service with most processing power and performance. See, basically it is like this. Imagine your application is very popular and being used a lot from various mobile applications, and these applications are global, spread all over the world. So you have hundreds and thousands of clients at the same time hitting the server. So in those kind of cases, this becomes really very handy. So in the meantime, let us also build an API which we want to encapsulate under the API app. So I'll use a simple web API to keep it simple. DSS API app demo, let us call it. It's having separate pricing tier. App service plan is created. Remember, app service plan can have multiple sites hosted. So all the sites are going to use a single plan. All the site will be part of that plan. So even if one site is unused and the other site is being used, there will not be much, there will not be any additional impact on the site. On the pricing. Pricing, in other words, I should say, pricing is not on the basis of a site, web app, but it is on the basis of the plan which is created. Keep this point in mind. So the API app is created now. Ideally, we are supposed to develop something and publish it, but I'm using the quick start feature, so I don't have to develop anything. It automatically generates something for us. Some contact list is generated for us. Some project is automatically created. You can actually download and directly use it from Studio. Last session when I was teaching you API app, I actually created an API app and published it. Here I'm getting it through quick start. So the API app is created. You can look at the API app. / Swagger contacts to get all the contacts. We don't have any contact right now. So let's post a contact. It's added. Now get this web API. Okay, two were already there. These were already there. On top of it, I added two more. So 1, 2, 3. Let's change the ID 4, 5. So I have to change the ID. No, it's not there. Update is not supported. Only get, post, delete, get one. That's it. That's fine. It's okay. So what will happen if I give get ID as 1 now? It's getting the first one only. See, basically this application which is generated through quick start is storing all the data in memory. It is not persistent. So good enough for testing. That's all. I needed some API. Imagine it is our employee API which is created in background if you want, where we are performing CRUD operations. So on top of that, we want to now create the API management. So still we have to wait now for it to get activated. So I've performed all these steps. Yeah, this is one more which I have to take care of. To the URL, I have to provide docs v1. So I go back to API. Add that here, DSS API, API app demo. Rest is fine. DSS API app demo. And course also we will have to give. From where are we going to call it? So I'm giving star because API management software is going to use it. So even course has to be taken care of. I gave star so everybody can use it. Otherwise, we are actually supposed to give the URL of the API management which we have created. This URL we should give, otherwise. Not there. Sorry. Now, if it is still taking time, let me do one thing. I'll download this project. Quick start ASP.NET. We're opening the solution file. Still activating. So here I just wanted to show you that we have controller, contacts controller, which is an API controller, and there are different methods of it. See, statically data is created. Get method, Swagger response, Swagger operation. It's basically a web API. That's all. Details will be stored in contacts.json. All that code is there. Get contacts gets it from there. Underscore storage, generic storage, separate class is there. Save, get. So I'm not interested in this code actually. Whatever web API you have developed, you just right click and publish. That publish profile also. Okay, sorry. We have to create the publish profile. That's it. So we have completed first step. We have completed second step. Now we have to do this, for which we should go to API, and here we should be able to add the API. Let's wait for a while.